What's going on, people? We are Tottenham TV, back here for some more content for you guys, and today we're going to be delving deep into the stats and we're going to find out if Spurs are too defensive or not. There's obviously been a narrative forming over Spurs this season saying that we are too defensive, not creative enough, so we're going to delve deep into the stats to see what we can find. So over to you, Sim.
Well, I've taken a look at some stats comparing us to our Premier League rivals and seeing how we stack up in certain aspects. I've looked at some like attacking stats, you know, goals, shots, all these kind of things, how many times we get into the penalty area, and I've looked at some defensive stats as well. This is all from FB Ref on the website, and this is all going to be categorised in terms of comparing us to the rest of the Premier League. So when you see the numbers, third, fourth, fifth, all that, that's like obviously out of 20. But obviously this season, a lot of people haven't been happy with maybe some either performances or maybe tactics, or how maybe it's more aesthetically how we've been playing. But sometimes looks can be deceiving, and it's all about, is it effective or not? And obviously it's only 8 games in. But I think especially after the Arsenal defeat, maybe it's a good time to maybe just take a step back and just see the overall picture of how we're actually playing and how effective we're being. Yeah,
I probably would have preferred to look at this before the Arsenal game, but now
the Arsenal game,
we are here now. I think that before we get into the stats, I mean, how do you feel like we're playing without, like, I know you've probably seen the stats anyway, but like in terms of the eye test, in terms of what you're seeing on the pitch with your eyes, what do you think is happening?
I think we're not pushing up higher up on the pitch anywhere near enough. And it was interesting to hear Dyer after the Arsenal game say that Conte wanted us to push up higher and he wanted us to press more and get further up the pitch, and we weren't able to do that. Obviously, when you're playing a side as good as Arsenal, it's more difficult to do that. The problem is, it's not just Arsenal we've done that, it's other games as well where we've been too deep, and that was a constant problem under Mourinho. What do we keep
exactly. We kept hearing those things, especially from Jose, saying, I didn't tell them to do that, I told them to push high up the pitch, I told them to attack, I told them to press, and we didn't see that kind of related onto the pitch after what the manager was saying, and now we're starting to hear similar things.
Yeah, that's a slight concern. That's maybe one of the big problems. But in terms of how we're playing, and in terms of if we're being effective, I think we don't have a lot of controller games. And I think as well, attacking wise, we could be doing a lot better. But I still think we're pretty solid defensively. And I think that's positive. And that's maybe why we've gotten the results we have. But still, there's a lot more to improve on.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at things so far this season, I think you can see there is a structure in place, and we're not conceding as many chances as maybe people would think with the amount of control that we are giving away in games. And I still think we are creating openings, creating chances. I think that, especially in our last 2 games, the games against Arsenal and against Frankfurt, there were so many opportunities for us to go on and take that game and really hurt the opposition. But we kept falling short in the final third where the passing was just completely off. So, I mean, look, I'm not completely happy with the way Spurs are playing their football at the moment. But for me, alarm bells don't need to start ringing just yet. I mean, I've said it consistently. I still think there is so much time in this season for us to click, and I think that is just around the corner, especially when Kulusevski comes back. But, you know, we spoke about how much strength of depth we've actually got now as opposed to last season. But when you're looking at the attacking options, when Kulusevski's out, suddenly we don't have a player to really play those balls in the final third, and that is a very big concern for me.
Yeah, and the one question mark is not just that, is are we getting it into the final third enough? Because it's all well and good getting it into those areas like we were against Arsenal, but if we're not doing it consistently enough, then all of a sudden it puts pressure on the times you do get it to actually make something happen. Whereas other better teams, like Man City and stuff, because they enter the final third so often and get so many passes and opportunities, they can afford to maybe miss a chance, and it's not such a big deal. Whereas for Spurs, I feel like so much emphasis is on these things because maybe we're not entering the final third enough.
Yeah, and also I got a feeling like because our defence is the way our defence is, I don't think our defence is anywhere near strong enough for where we want to be. So I think a key part to why maybe Conte is so pragmatic and why we're not seeing us push up as often as we would have liked is because we need protection for that defence. And you can see even with protection for the defence, we're coming under quite a lot of pressure, maybe without conceding too many chances or too many clear-cut chances. But if we were to be a bit more adventurous, the defence would definitely struggle massively because of that.
Yeah, but you'd have to control those counter-attacks and stuff, and then it wouldn't.
Yeah, but can we do that is another question. But let's look at the stats and let's see what that's saying.
Yeah, so if we look at the attacking stats first, I mean, on the face of it, the attacking stats don't look too bad. Goals, we're third in the league for goals with 18. Shots, we're fifth. Shots on target, we're third. Expected goals, we're fifth. So we're creating decent chances. Key passes, we're fifth. But when it comes to the kind of off the ball statistics, like in terms of high pressing and stuff, at the moment clearly either Conte doesn't want to play that way, or that's just or we haven't been doing what Conte says. But we look at pressures in the final third, 15th, tackles in the final third, 18th, touches in the final third with 14th, and carries into the final third were 8th. But interestingly enough, I found this very interesting. When it comes to carries in the final third, when it comes to touches in the final third, we're 14th in the league, so really low. When it comes to carries into the penalty area, we're top of the league.
Yes.
So what I guess that means is that we're not getting, in terms of like passing moves in the final third, we don't have too many of them. But what we do have is very good dribblers in the final third who are able to carry the ball in the penalty area and they cause problems like that. And I think Kulusevski, I think we did a tweet a couple of weeks ago, Kulusevski is top of the league in terms of Premier League players who have carried the ball into the penalty area the most times. So I think obviously, it means that we don't get into the final third that much, but what it also means is when we do get there, we are making things happen when we do get into the final third. But the problem is the amount of times we do get there, and that's a bit of a problem for me.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the touches and stuff a bit higher. Yeah,
I mean, I probably wouldn't have assumed that those were the stats where we're kind of first in carries into the penalty box, but then when you're looking at touches in the final third or
the thing,
pressures,
like
look how low we are.
It's not a lot in the final third, but in the penalty area.
No, I know.
It's weird.
It's very strange, and I don't get it at all. Maybe it's because our midfield players are not doing enough going forward.
I would say what this suggests is we're very good at counter-attacking.
Yeah.
So what it suggests is we're not getting the ball that much. So we're not dominating the ball in the final third. But when we do get our chance, a lot of the times we're actually making a lot out of a little. So when we do get our chance to get in the final third, we get in the penalty area very often when we do get there.
Surely
so that's positive, but it's not so positive that we're not getting the final third that much.
Surely that highlights the need maybe to change the system up a bit and put another man in the midfield so we can start dominating that midfield a bit more and then carrying the ball a bit further from deep.
Yes and no, because it does suggest potentially we need to have a bit more action in the final third. No, not disagreeing with that, but you could argue that those stats as well suggest that how the way Conte is playing is pretty effective, because if we are that in terms of touches in the penalty box, that's where we're most dangerous. That's where you're going to be. That's where the likelihood of goals are going to come from. So Conte might argue that if we're getting into the penalty area more often than most other teams, that is a positive. And even though we're not maybe getting as many touches in the final third that much, but we're still getting in the penalty area equal or level with a lot of teams who are touching the ball in the final third. So maybe it's a case of, like Conte would argue, we're not having possession for possession's sake. We're actually being effective when we do get there, and actually when we get to the final third, we get into the penalty area, whereas a lot of teams might have a lot of touches in the final third, but not into the penalty area as much as we are.
I'd love to know how these stats stack up against maybe the last 10 games of last season. That would be really interesting, because the way I look at it is that last season, the last 10 games, we were actually playing our football really good, building up from the back, really good football on show, where I would think maybe those stats would be a bit different in the final 10 games of the season, and I think would be quite high in both sects, not just one of them. And I'd love to see see us get back to that, but I don't know the stats, so maybe...
No, I don't know. One stat, maybe when we get into defensive stats, I'll show you. Maybe there is one stat I picked out which was a bit of a difference to last season to where we are this season, and indicates maybe why we're not having as much control this season. But if we go to the defensive stats, goals against, we're 8th in the league. We've conceded 10 goals in 8 games, so could be a bit better. Shots against, we've conceded the fourth highest shots against, but when it comes to XG per shot, we're the best in the league. So every shot we concede is the lowest quality shot in the Premier League. For every chance. That
takes you back to like the games against Wolves, and there have been some other games, Nottingham Forest as well. I mean, we let them have so many shots, but they're all from like 20, 30 yards, like from really far out. And we were talking after those games, and fans would come on and say, but the opposition had so many shots against us, but it is literally limiting them. We're not letting them anywhere near our goal in those kind of games. We're limiting them to shots that's so far out. So that makes sense. Yeah.
The problem a bit, I guess, is the fact that we are still putting ourselves under a bit too much pressure. First of all, when it comes to defensive, being in our own defensive third, we are first in the league for the most touches in our own defensive third. We're third in the league for pressures in our own defensive third. We're 6th in the league with tackles in our own defensive third, and we're first as well for touches in our own penalty area. So we have a lot of possession in the possession we don't have in the final third. Pretty much we have it in our own defensive third, and that is as you can see it. But one of the more worrying things is when it comes to obviously the quality of shots we're giving away isn't great, but when it comes to carries in our own penalty area and our own final third, that we concede one of the highest in the league, and maybe that's something that Conte has to address, because we can't be constantly being put under that much pressure all the time and expect that we're just going to keep, Premier League players, as much as the XG and stuff per shot is going to be low, we're playing in the Premier League. You see what Partey did on the edge of the area. That's obviously a very low XG chance, but they have the quality to do that. So we need to restrict the amount of times players are able to get opportunities in our final third, and that's a big problem. And I guess the big thing I've identified for me why we're not restricting the opposition is, I think the amount of how aggressive we're being in the middle is that, like last season we were doing a really aggressive mid-block, and that was really effective, winning the ball in the middle of the park, not necessarily high in the final third, but in the middle, and then all of a sudden getting the ball forward and creating space. Last season, for tackles in the middle third of the pitch, we were 2nd in the league during the whole season. So really, really aggressive. This season, we're in the bottom half of tackles in the middle third. And that suggests that we're not winning the ball, which is what I think Conte wants. Conte is known for his mid-block. And why we're not winning the ball as many times in the middle third, I don't know. And as well for pressures, we had a lot more pressures in the middle third last season than we do this season, and that maybe suggests why we're seeing the team drop a lot lower than we were maybe last season.
So even again, takes me back to my point. Having said that, does that not show the need for another man in midfield so we can start gaining control of the midfield and really start winning the ball back in those areas of the pitch again?
And that's a case a lot of people will be making. Maybe if we do add an extra person in midfield, you have an extra body in there who can win the ball back, especially with the profile midfielders we have. And that can help us exploit the spaces a lot more often in the final third than we are at the moment, where at the moment it's too easy for teams against us, not necessarily to score, but it's way too easy for them to enter our final third and to get into that area of the pitch where they can hurt us. But it's not necessarily easy for them when they do get there to hurt us, but it's too easy for them to get there. Whereas last season was a lot more difficult for them to get there, and that's something that maybe Conte needs to address why that's happening. And maybe it does need an extra man in midfield to help with that balance. The only question is, then you play the one less forward, and then
but with Kulusevski out, and since Kulusevski's out, we've seen a drop off in passing quality in the final third. So whilst Kulusevski is out, surely this is the perfect time to try out that three in midfield with a Kane and Son up top, and then really go at them. And then you'll see that Kane and Son partnership again really flourish, hopefully. And then you've got three in midfield, the defence and the wing backs. The wing backs push on high as they always do, and then you've got the midfield, one drops deep or a couple drops deep to try win the ball back in those really key areas, and maybe a Bissouma or a Bentang or even a Højbjerg, or probably a Højbjerg, to be honest, to bomb on forward and really go and help at that attack.
Yeah, I agree, and I would like to see the 3-5-2. I think that it would be a formation that could help us potentially solve some problems. With every formation, it's a bit of give and take, isn't it? It's not like there's a perfect formation. So I think that 3-5-2 for me is even more suited to counter-attacking than the 3-4-3 in that sense, because you have those two strikers very central in those positions, and if there is space left for them, they can really hurt you. Whereas when we have the three up front, that leads to more having a bit more possession. I think on that's what I would suggest, because the players could be a bit isolated in the two if we're having a lot more possession. So I think I would go with the 3-5-2 right now, especially with the players we have on our bench, with like Skip and Bissouma ready to come in. I would like to see how they do, and then see how what the balance of the team looks like if we can actually start pushing up higher on the pitch if we do have a 3-5-2. But at the moment, I think
it would catch teams off guard as well, because teams are clearly just trying to overload midfields and to try and catch us out with our two in midfield. And I know Bentancur and Højbjerg both having good seasons as well, which is a strange one. But I do think they need massive help in that midfield, whether it be a Skippy, whether it be a Bissouma. Either of them, I think, would do an absolutely stellar job in there. And I think that we need to go there sooner rather than later. And like I said before, I think whilst Kulusevski's out, I think it's the perfect opportunity to go and try that.
Yeah, I agree. So look, I think there are options for Conte. He knows he can play the 3-5-2. He said it himself. So it was all a case of what he thinks is right for each game. I think I agree with you. Now Kulusevski's out, I think as well, it's the perfect time, because then you have options to change it. Right now, if things aren't working with a 3-4-3, we have to kind of just stick with it, because we can't really change things if we're not winning. Whereas even if we're winning or we're not winning with the 3-5-2, there are more variations, and I think it gives Conte a few more weapons, and it gives us a more solid base in the middle. The only problem is out wide. Do we have a bit of an issue? Because before you have Emerson and Perisic, whatever, out wide, and you have the two wingers, but now you're literally then going to be a bit isolated out wide. That's a bit of an issue, but then hopefully, because we have an extra centre mid, they can help go out wide with them and stuff like that. But will we lack a bit of width? Potentially. That's also something you got to think about when going to that formation. But I would like to see it. I would like us to try it, and hopefully some of these stats can be addressed and we can start improving on them. But I think the stats do tell a bit of a story of our season. So you think that Spurs are being too defensive? Yeah, I think so. I think we're being way too low at the moment, even compared to how we were last season. I think we're being far too deep, and I think we're spending way too much time on our own defensive third, and we have to work on that and think about why we're spending so much time in our own half, in our own defensive third, and think about how we can start getting into the final third and into those, even the middle third, a lot more than we are right now. Am I too concerned about touching the final third? I am a bit, but at least the argument with that is we are getting to the penalty area a lot, so we're being effective with our possession. But the thing is, how long can we keep that up for? Our team's going to start to snuff out. Is that number going to carry on for the whole season, or do we have to eventually start getting to the final third more to be a little bit more productive? And I think that's probably the case. Yeah, and we did a similar video last year in like the latter stages of the Nuno tenure, and we were like literally 20th for every single element possible, any single positive element possible, and first for every single negative element possible. So I guess like when people want to compare the start of this season to the start we had last season under Nuno, I do think it's kind of night and day to where we were, because like
we couldn't even get a shot on target, never mind get a carry into the final third or the penalty area. Now I think with Conte we saw how his methods can work at the back end of last season, and I would call on people just to be a bit more patient with Conte and the team to kind of gel into this season, because I keep saying it every single day on one of these videos that it's gonna come, and I'm standing by that. I really believe that. And I think that when you're looking at the last two games against Arsenal and against Frankfurt, yes, we actually got battered by Arsenal in the end of it, but there were signs of that where we could have actually got something out of that game if things didn't go so wrong as they did in the second half. And against Frankfurt, I've seen so many people talk about how such a terrible performance it was, but actually it wasn't a terrible performance. Actually, most of the players on that pitch played really well apart from the front three, and if the front three were actually on form like they usually are week in, week out, we probably would have won that game 2 or 3-0. So I think people just need to be a bit more patient with the way things are going, and you know, for those kind of stats and for us to say how defensive we are and to be sitting in third in the league, to sitting in second in our Champions League,
doing pretty well. But the underlying ones are a bit worrying, but hopefully those are things we can improve on during the season. But I want to know people's thoughts. I want to know what people think about the stats we've laid out and what they can read into it, because that's what I can see when I look at them.
All right. Well, there you have it. That is our take on if Spurs are too defensive or not. We've laid out the stats for you, so let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, come on, you Spurs.